Every morning, we wake up with a choice. Will we trust God fully, or will we hold on to our own plans and fears? Surrendering to Him isn't always easy, but it's the only way to walk in true peace, purpose, and freedom. Today, we're diving into powerful testimonies of surrender, real stories of faith, struggle, and transformation. If you've ever wrestled with letting go, if you've ever wondered what it truly means to follow God no matter the cost, this message is for you. Join me as we pray, reflect, and open our hearts to the life-changing power of surrender. Let's take this journey together and say, Lord, take my life today. Let me follow you no matter the cost. Have you ever felt the weight of uncertainty, but knew deep down that God was calling you to trust Him completely? I remember a time in my life when I struggled with surrendering everything to Him. I had my own plans, dreams, and expectations, thinking I knew what was best for me. But God had a different plan, one that required me to let go and trust Him fully. At first, I resisted, afraid of what surrender might mean. Would I lose control, miss out on what I wanted, or be led somewhere unfamiliar? Fear and doubt filled my heart until I came across Luke 9, verse 23, where Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." That verse shook me. I realized that true faith isn't just believing in God. It's trusting Him enough to surrender everything. One night, overwhelmed by uncertainty, I finally knelt and prayed, "Lord, take my life today. Let me follow you no matter the cost." In that moment, I felt a peace that surpassed all understanding. I no longer needed to control everything because I knew God had a greater purpose. From that day forward, things began to shift. Doors I never expected started opening, and while challenges still came, I faced them with confidence, knowing I was walking in God's will. Surrendering didn't mean losing. It meant gaining something far greater, His perfect plan for my life. If you're struggling with letting go today, I encourage you to trust Him. Say a simple prayer, surrender your worries, and allow God to lead. When you let go and let God, you'll experience peace and purpose beyond what you could ever imagine. There comes a point in every believer's life when they must decide if they are truly willing to follow Jesus no matter the cost. I remember struggling with this reality when God began calling me out of my comfort zone. I had built a life that felt secure. I had plans, goals, and dreams that made sense to me. But deep inside, I felt God tugging at my heart, asking me to trust Him in a way I never had before. At first, I resisted because surrender felt like losing control. What if His plan was different from mine? What if it led me to places I wasn't ready to go? Fear gripped my heart, and I held on tightly to my own understanding, convincing myself that I knew what was best. But the more I fought God's will, the more restless I became. It wasn't until I came across Matthew 16, verse 24, where Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me," that I finally understood what He was asking of me. It wasn't just about believing in Him. It was about fully surrendering, even if it meant sacrifice. One night, after wrestling with doubt and fear, I broke down and prayed, "Lord, take my life today. Let me follow you no matter the cost." I released my fears, my ambitions, and my need for control, and in return, I felt a peace that I had never known before. The weight of striving on my own lifted, and I began to see that surrender was not about losing. It was about stepping into something greater. From that moment on, my life changed. Doors that I had never imagined opened, and though challenges still came, I faced them with a deep trust that God was guiding my every step. I realized that true fulfillment isn't found in clinging to our own plans, but in walking in obedience to God. If you are struggling with surrender today, I encourage you to trust Him completely. Let go of fear, release your worries, and say, "Lord, take my life today." When you do, you will find that His plans are far greater than anything you could have imagined. And in surrendering, you'll discover a life of true purpose, peace, and joy. Each morning, I wake up with a choice to surrender my life to God or to hold on to my own plans and desires. There was a time when surrender felt impossible, when fear of the unknown kept me from fully trusting Him. I believed in God, but I struggled to release control, always trying to manipulate circumstances to fit my understanding. But then life took an unexpected turn, and I found myself in a situation where I had no choice but to let go. Everything I relied on, my plan, my security, my expectations, began to crumble, and I was left with one question. Would I trust God, even when I didn't understand? One morning, broken and exhausted from trying to fight my own battles, I knelt in prayer and whispered, Lord, take my life today. I surrender everything, my dreams, my fears, my future, into your hands. Lead me where you want me to go. In that moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't that my problems disappeared, but the weight of carrying them alone lifted. I realized that surrender wasn't about giving up. It was about giving in to the one who knows me better than I know myself. From that day forward, I began to live differently. I stopped striving to force outcomes and started trusting God's timing. I learned to rest in His presence, to find peace in the waiting, and to walk in faith even when the path was unclear. And as I did, doors I had never even considered began to open. What I thought was a loss turned into a blessing, and what I once feared became a testimony of God's faithfulness. Surrendering daily is not always easy. There are still moments when I am tempted to take control again. But every time I choose to trust Him, I am reminded that His ways are higher than mine, and His plans are always for my good. If you are struggling with surrender today, I want to encourage you. Let go. Release your fears, your worries, and your plans into God's hands. Say, Lord, take my life today, and believe that He will guide you. When you do, you will discover a life of freedom, peace, and purpose that can only come from fully trusting Him. Fear and doubt have a way of creeping into our hearts, especially when God calls us to step into the unknown. I remember a time in my life when I felt God leading me in a direction that didn't make sense to me. I had always been someone who liked to have control, someone who planned everything down to the smallest detail. But suddenly, I found myself at a crossroads, facing a decision that required me to trust God completely or stay in the safety of what was familiar. The thought of surrendering terrified me. What if things didn't work out the way I wanted? What if I failed? What if following God's plan meant losing everything I had worked for? These fears paralyzed me, and for weeks, I wrestled with doubt, convincing myself that maybe I had misheard God's voice. But the more I resisted, the more restless I became. It was as if God was gently reminding me that His plans were greater than mine, that I could either live a life of faith or one of fear. One night, overwhelmed with anxiety, I broke down and prayed, Lord, I don't know what's ahead, but I choose to trust You. Take my life today, take my plans, my fears, my doubts. I surrender it all to You. In that moment, peace washed over me like never before. It wasn't that all my questions were answered, but I knew deep in my heart that God was with me, guiding me every step of the way. I took that leap of faith, not knowing what would come next, but believing that God was leading me towards something better. And as I walked in obedience, I saw doors open that I never could have imagined. The very things I was afraid of losing were replaced with something far greater: God's purpose, His provision, and His peace. Looking back, I realized that the greatest blessings in my life have come from the moments when I surrendered completely to Him. Surrender doesn't mean we won't face challenges, but it does mean that we don't have to face them alone. God is always with us, always working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. If you are struggling with fear and doubt today, I encourage you to take a step of faith. Let go of the need to control every outcome and trust that God's plan is better than anything you could ever imagine. Say, Lord, take my life today, and believe that He will lead you. When you surrender, you will find that His peace replaces your fear, His strength replaces your weakness, and His purpose becomes clearer than ever before. There was a time in my life when I struggled to understand my true purpose. I had goals, ambitions, and dreams, but no matter how hard I worked, something always felt missing. I thought that if I could just achieve a certain level of success, I would finally feel fulfilled. But the more I chased after my own plans, the emptier I felt inside. It wasn't until I reached a breaking point, exhausted, frustrated, and questioning everything, that I finally turned to God with an open heart. I remember praying one morning, Lord, take my life today. I surrender everything to You. Show me what You want for my life. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a peace that I had never experienced before. It was as if God was gently telling me that I didn't have to figure it all out on my own, that if I trusted him, he would lead me to where I was meant to be. From that day forward, I started walking in faith instead of fear. I stopped striving for things that weren't meant for me and began seeking God's will above my own. Doors that I never expected to open suddenly appeared before me, and opportunities that I once thought were impossible became reality. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I still questioned if I was on the right path. But every time I surrendered again, God showed me that he was in control. He revealed to me that true purpose is not found in worldly achievements, but in living for him, serving others, and trusting his plan. Looking back, I realized that surrendering to God was the best decision I ever made. It didn't mean giving up my dreams. It meant aligning them with his greater purpose. It meant letting go of the pressure to control everything and instead walking in faith, knowing that God's plan was always better than my own. If you are feeling lost or unsure about your purpose, I encourage you to do what I did. Surrender, pray, and ask God to take control, to lead you where he wants you to go. Say, Lord, take my life today, and trust that he will guide your steps. When you let go and let God, you will begin to see his hand at work in ways you never imagined. You will find peace, clarity, and a deep sense of fulfillment that only comes from following his will. No matter where you are right now, know that God has a plan for you. And when you surrender to him, he will lead you into a life of true purpose, joy, and meaning.